Life can feel like walking through an endless maze of doors, each one leading to a mystery. Every time I stood in front of one, I froze. What if I chose the wrong one? What if stepping through meant falling flat on my face? So, I stood still, analyzing every possibility until I realized the truth. Overthinking is a silent thief. It doesn't just steal time, it steals opportunity. Standing still might feel safe, but it's a trap. I used to envy those who seemed to know exactly where they were headed. But here's the thing, they didn't know. They just started moving. Life isn't about making the perfect choice. It's about making any choice and sticking with it. I learned that standing still only guarantees one thing: nothing changes. So, I decided to move, and wouldn't you know it, the world didn't collapse. Sometimes just taking one step is the most courageous thing you can do. Taking that first step is like leaping into a pool when you're not sure how deep it is. Scary, right? But here's the secret. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're finally in the water. I've learned that doubt is the mind's way of testing your courage. It whispers, what if you fail? But I ask myself, what if I succeed? That shift in perspective changes everything. My first step was shaky. I wasn't confident. I wasn't ready, but I was determined. The fear of failure didn't disappear, but it became quieter. And every small victory silenced it a little more. Doubt doesn't need to be your enemy. Treat it like a coach pushing you to prove it wrong. No one ever feels ready to start something new, but readiness isn't a prerequisite. It's the reward for starting. When I stopped overthinking and began acting, I realized that fear only grows in the absence of action, that I used to obsess over making the right choice. What if I picked the wrong major, the wrong career, the wrong project? Then I heard this life-changing idea. It's not about hoping you've made the right choice. It's about making your choice the right one. That's when it hit me. The power was mine all along. Sure, it's great to weigh your options, but don't let decision-making turn into decision delaying. I remember hesitating for weeks about starting my first big project, thinking I needed more time, more skills, or more confidence. But you know what I actually needed? To start. Once I did, I stopped worrying about whether it was the right move and focused on making it work. The energy I used to waste on second-guessing myself was finally spent on creating something real. That's the beauty of commitment. It transforms uncertainty into clarity. So, instead of waiting for the perfect moment, I decided to make every moment count. Routines might sound boring, but trust me, they're a lifesaver when everything else feels like chaos. I used to think routines were for people who couldn't handle spontaneity. Boy, was I wrong. Turns out, routines aren't about being rigid. They're about creating space to breathe. My mornings became my sanctuary. A cup of coffee, a quiet moment to journal, maybe even a quick walk. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was mine. These little habits didn't just set the tone for my day. They gave me something to hold on to when I felt like the world was spinning out of control. People underestimate the power of small rituals. They're not just tasks, they're anchors. They remind you who you are and what you stand for, even when the day ahead looks overwhelming. And the best part? Once your routine becomes second nature, you don't have to think about it. It works quietly in the background, keeping you steady. Without my routine, I'd still be stuck in my own head, chasing productivity without direction. Back in 2018, I picked up a camera with the enthusiasm of a kid, trying out a new toy and the skill of someone who barely knew which button to press. My first photos were, let's be honest, awful. But here's the thing, they existed. They were real, tangible proof that I was trying. I didn't know what aperture was, couldn't tell an ISO from a hole in the ground, but I kept going. Every shot taught me something new about light, angles, patience, and myself. Sure, I watched tutorials and read guides, but nothing compared to the lessons learned through sheer trial and error. I realized that you can't wait until you're good to start. Starting is how you get good. The beauty of learning by doing is that every mistake becomes a stepping stone, every failure a lesson in disguise. That camera? It wasn't just a tool. It was a mirror showing me that progress is messy, imperfect, and absolutely worth it. Let's talk about mistakes. The kind that make you cringe and wish you could disappear. I've made plenty. Like the time I took on a photography gig and ended up overexposing half the shots because I thought auto settings were for amateurs. Spoiler, they're not. At first, I was mortified. How could I mess up something so basic? But once the panic subsided, I realized something important. That mistake taught me more than any tutorial ever could. Mistakes aren't failures. They're lessons wrapped in awkward packaging. Each one challenges you to think differently, to adapt, and to grow. The fear of making mistakes holds so many people back. But here's the truth. Avoiding mistakes means avoiding growth. When you mess up, and you will, it's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of understanding. Now, when I look back on my early stumbles, I don't see failure. I see proof that I was brave enough to try, and that's something no mistake can take away. Perfectionism is like quicksand. It looks harmless, but the more you struggle to get everything just right, the deeper you sink. I learned this the hard way when I launched a brand called Made by Saturday. I wanted every detail to be flawless. The logo, the tagline, even the packaging. I spent weeks tweaking the tiniest things while ignoring the bigger picture. By the time I finally launched, I was burned out and my audience had lost interest. The brand flopped, and I was left wondering what went wrong. But here's what I realized. Perfectionism isn't about striving for excellence. It's about fear. Fear of judgment, failure, and imperfection itself. It paralyzes you, making you think that if it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. But life doesn't work that way. Good enough is always better than not at all. That failure taught me to focus on progress, not perfection. Because in the end, perfection isn't attainable, but growth is. Failure is like a shadow. It's always lurking, but it only has power if you let it. For years, I avoided taking risks because I was terrified of falling short. But here's the thing. Failure isn't the enemy. It's the best teacher you'll ever have. The first time I failed publicly, I was mortified. I'd overpromised on a project and underdelivered, leaving me embarrassed and questioning my abilities. But instead of running from it, I leaned in. I asked myself, what went wrong? And how can I do better next time? That reflection was a turning point. I realized that failure is never final unless you let it be. It's not a dead end, it's a detour. Every setback brings clarity, resilience, and the chance to rebuild stronger. Now, I don't just accept failure, I expect it. It's a natural part of any journey, and the sooner you embrace it, the sooner you can move forward. Comparing yourself to others is like running a race where you're constantly looking sideways. You'll never get anywhere if you're too busy watching someone else's stride. I used to do this all the time. I'd see someone's polished portfolio or viral video and think, why can't I be that good? But then it hit me. I was comparing my beginning to someone else's middle. Of course, it didn't measure up. The truth is, no one shows their struggles, just their successes. What I didn't see were the late nights, the failures, the doubts they'd overcome to get there. That realization changed everything. Instead of comparing myself to others, I started comparing myself to, myself. Was I better today than I was yesterday? If the answer was yes, that was all the validation I needed. Now, when I see someone else succeed, I don't feel envy. I feel inspired. Their success is proof that hard work pays off, and mine will too. Uncertainty is like walking through fog. You can't see the end, and every step feels like a gamble. For years, I avoided uncertainty at all costs, clinging to the illusion of control. But here's the truth. Control is overrated, and uncertainty is where all the magic happens. The first time I leaned into the unknown was terrifying. Starting my YouTube channel with no clear plan or guarantee of success felt like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. But as I kept creating, I realized that uncertainty wasn't my enemy. It was my fuel. It forced me to adapt, to innovate, to grow in ways I never imagined. Sure, it's uncomfortable, but that's the point. Growth doesn't happen in your comfort zone. It happens when you step into the unknown and keep walking. Now, I see uncertainty not as something to fear, but as a signal that I'm on the right track. Because if everything feels safe and predictable, am I really pushing myself hard enough? They say it takes a village to raise a child, but I'd argue it also takes a village to build a dream. I used to think success was a solo journey, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The turning point came when I started sharing my work online. At first, it was just a handful of likes and a few kind comments, but over time, those connections grew into something much bigger. Strangers became supporters, supporters became collaborators, and collaborators became friends. Their feedback pushed me to improve. Their encouragement kept me going, and their stories reminded me I wasn't alone. Community isn't just about networking. It's about finding people who believe in you, sometimes more than you believe in yourself. It's about celebrating each other's wins and sharing each other's struggles. No one succeeds in isolation, and the sooner you embrace the power of community, the stronger you'll become. Success might feel personal, but it's built on collective effort. Consistency is the unglamorous hero of success. It doesn't get the spotlight, but it does all the heavy lifting. I used to think big, dramatic actions were the key to achievement. Grand gestures, all-nighters, big breakthroughs. But then I realized that small, steady steps are far more powerful. The first time I committed to daily progress, it wasn't glamorous. I spent 20 minutes a day practicing photography, and most of those photos were terrible. But by the end of the month, I saw real improvement. That's the thing about consistency. It's not exciting, but it works. It builds momentum, confidence, and a foundation for growth. Perfection is a myth, but progress is real. And consistency is how you achieve it. Now, whether it's learning a skill, creating content, or even building habits, I focus on showing up every day, no matter how small the effort feels. Because success isn't built in a day. It's built one brick at a time. That if there's one thing I've learned, it's that waiting for the right moment is the fastest way to go nowhere. There's no perfect time, no perfect plan, and certainly no perfect outcome waiting for you to get started. The right time is always now. I remember standing at the edge of starting my first project, paralyzed by what ifs. What if I failed? What if people laughed? But then I asked myself, what if this works? That simple question shattered my hesitation. So I took the leap, and while the road wasn't smooth, it was worth every stumble. Action creates momentum, and momentum creates opportunity. Every time you act, you're one step closer to something real. So, whether it's starting that business, writing that book, or learning that skill, stop waiting. There's a whole world of possibilities, but you'll never see them if you don't move. Start now, start messy, start scared, but just start. Because the only real failure is staying still. Before I knew how to take action, I learned how to dream. Visualization became my secret weapon. It wasn't about daydreaming. It was about seeing myself succeed, down to the smallest detail. I'd picture myself giving a presentation, hearing the applause, or seeing my work displayed for others to admire. It wasn't magic, but it was motivating. When you can imagine your success vividly enough, it starts to feel attainable. Studies show that visualization helps build confidence and focus, and I can vouch for that. I used to think it was silly, but once I started, I couldn't stop. It gave me a sense of purpose and direction. Of course, visualizing isn't enough. You still have to do the work. But it's like having a map. You still need to walk the path, but at least you know where you're headed. So, close your eyes, see your future, and then open them and start building it. Burnout isn't a badge of honor. It's a warning sign. I used to think working harder meant caring more, but that mindset nearly broke me. Long hours, skipped meals, and sleepless nights didn't make me more productive. They made me exhausted. I reached a point where even the things I loved felt like chores. That's when I realized that rest isn't a weakness. It's a necessity. Recovery is part of the process, just like effort. Taking time to recharge doesn't mean you're lazy. It means you're smart enough to protect your energy for the long haul. Now I build rest into my schedule, just like work. A walk outside, an hour with a book, or even just sitting quietly can do wonders for your mind and soul. Burnout taught me that success isn't about working yourself into the ground. It's about knowing when to pause, breathe, and come back stronger. Balance isn't optional, it's essential.